This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, we now bring you a discussion on meeting of Shanghai Cooperation Organization Council of Heads of Government. The participants are Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
India today hosted the virtual meet of the Council of Heads of the Government of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India was represented by the Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu, and in his opening remarks, the Vice President strongly spoke about cross-border terrorism, and he also called for combating the menace under a collective approach. Ambassador Sajjanhar, when we see the statement by the Vice President addressing the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and Pakistan is a member of the SCO today, even though there is no mention of Pakistan, the reference is definitely towards Pakistan. How effective is this call out to all the SCO members then to take note of what is happening across the border and to do something about it?
The points that you have mentioned, of course, they were raised by the Honorable Vice President in his opening remarks. You would recall that when the SCO Heads of State Summit took place in Russia, again on a virtual platform that was chaired by President Putin of Russia, and there also Prime Minister Modi had mentioned that Pakistan is misusing the forum of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization by raising bilateral issues. And you would also recall that when there was a meeting that had been organized by Prime Minister Modi by India on the 15th of March on COVID-19, at that time also the representative of Pakistan had raised the issue of Kashmir. So I think this was very appropriate and very apt what Vice President said in his opening remarks. I think he sent out a very strong message. And in addition to speaking about cross-border terrorism, he also said that there are countries which leverage terrorism as an instrument of state policy. Again, as you said very correctly, no reference by name, no mention of Pakistan, but it points a finger very clearly to Pakistan. And he also mentioned about deliberately bringing bilateral issues in the deliberations of the meeting. He also mentioned, when he's talking about trade, that the countries should be transparent and trustworthy. And this, I think, was also a reference to China, because we have found that in terms of the supply chains during the period of the COVID-19, China has been found to be very untrustworthy, and in fact it has been trying to weaponize some of the essential items that are required for treatment of the COVID-19. So I think this message was very, very clear. I do hope that countries take note, and particularly Pakistan does not engage it with raising the bilateral issues in future.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, as you pointed out very rightly about China and how China's behavior globally and in its bilateral behavior also with India, we have found that there is a huge trust deficit, primarily because China's aggressive behavior and its policies do not inspire any kind of trust or confidence. How important do you think is a forum like the SCO, where we have China present? We have the Prime Minister of China today attending the virtual summit, where our Vice President, Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, also spoke. How important do you think is then the presence of China? Also, when he spoke about cross-border terrorism, the Vice President, and the indirect reference is to Pakistan. How important, how significant is for China to get this message that, one, China and Pakistan have this really cozy relationship, and this doesn't work in the long run? How important is this forum then to address this issue for India?
Two aspects that you raised here. One is in terms of the trust deficit between India and China. And you would recall that now this trust deficit is not only between India and China, but between China and the whole world. You look at the manner in which China has been dealing with Australia, with which it has been dealing with some of the other partners in Southeast Asia, in Europe and elsewhere. There's a huge trust deficit. There have been some reports that have come out, some polls that have come out, which say that the trustworthiness of China has dipped to historically low levels throughout the world, particularly as far as the developed and the advanced countries are concerned. The second is in terms of cross-border terrorism. I think India has raised this issue at different fora, whether it is BRICS or whether it is RIC, where China is present, and so on and so forth. So I'm sure China is quite well aware of this particular issue, but I think we need to keep on mentioning this at every opportunity so that we keep the pressure on as far as China is concerned and also as far as Pakistan is concerned, particularly when we have this FATF meeting, which is going to take place very soon in February next year. So all the pressure must be put on Pakistan and China.
Ambassador Sajjanwar, we've also seen that the Prime Minister of Pakistan has chosen to skip this summit. Would you say there's a specific reason?
I will not really like to ascribe any motives to it. They don't want to be seen attending, participating in a meeting that is chaired by India. I had given reference to the SAARC meeting that had been organized by India, which was chaired by Prime Minister Modi on the 15th of March. You would recall there also Pakistan Prime Minister did not come. We shouldn't really pay so much attention to what Pakistan is doing or what it is not doing. I think for us, SCO is much more significant in terms of providing us with a platform to reach out, particularly to the 4 Central Asian countries and also to Afghanistan, whose president also is a permanent invitee to these summits of the head of government as also to the summits of the heads of state. So I think these are primary partners and we need to really reach out to them so that we can strengthen our cooperation and collaboration with these countries on political, economic, trade and cultural issues.
Master Sajjanwar, we saw that the Prime Ministers from the SCO member states of Russia, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan attended the SCO meeting. And apart from these SCO member states, the 4 observer states of the SCO, that is Afghanistan, Belarus, Iran and Mongolia also participated. And as you mentioned about Afghanistan, we've all seen what has been happening in Afghanistan, the war, the US change in policy where President Trump wants to take back the troops. Do you feel SCO then offers an opportunity for the region to discuss Afghanistan, to discuss the security parameters of Afghanistan? Because for all SCO matters, what happens in Afghanistan also has huge national interest.
2 comments I would like to make here. One is that as far as the security situation in Afghanistan is concerned, it is really discussed by the SCO Heads of State Summit, which took place on the 10th of this month, and it was chaired by President Putin. And there is also an SCO contact group on Afghanistan. It was there for quite some time, then it was moribund for many years, and then it was reactivated just about 2 years ago. So that is the forum where all discussions about ensuring the security in Afghanistan is concerned. As far as the SCO Heads of Government Council is concerned, here the participants discuss economic, trade, cultural, social and people-to-people relations. And there also, of course, reaching out to Afghanistan is extremely important because along with the peace and the security, as the Honorable Vice President also said, that if we want to promote the trade and economic cooperation between countries, then peace and security is extremely important. So yes, the participation of Afghanistan and in this summit of the Council of Heads of Government, presence of the President of Afghanistan is very important, as the President of Afghanistan participated in the SCO Heads of State Summit on the 10th of this month.
Master Sajjanwar, we've also seen that some people have pointed out that the SCO today can act as a counterweight to NATO and that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has emerged as one of the largest trans-regional international organizations. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I think it is a fair assessment if SCO were to pull its weight. And unfortunately, so far, it has not been able to do so because there is so much of a mismatch between the bigger players. If you look at the Central Asian countries, the 4 of them, if you compare them to the bigger players, their standing is much lower. And they are not able to pull their weight together. Even as far as Afghanistan is concerned, and that is the question that you had posed. Of course, the US troops are withdrawing, but if the SCO as such were to try and fill that vacuum, it would be very difficult because there is no standing military force that the SCO countries have. Of course, they do conduct peace mission exercises but that is basically to deal with terrorist actions and any terrorist attacks that any of the countries might undergo or might experience. But otherwise, I think the role of SCO to bring peace and security in Afghanistan or to act as an Asian NATO, I think the possibility of that appear to be rather few and remote.
Ambassador Sajjana, we've also seen that the SCO Summit of Heads of Government, it primarily also decides the strategies and priorities for trade and economic cooperation for the next year. How important do you think is the trade and the economic cooperation in this region? We have seen these economic blocs coming all over the world. We have the EU, we have other economic blocs. Do you feel that the SCO has the potential to become a major influential global forum when it comes to trade and economic cooperation?
Let me respond to this in two ways. Number one, of course, trade and economic cooperation is extremely important, particularly at this time because the whole world, including the SCO countries, are facing the brunt of the economic downturn as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So all the countries are suffering from this problem. So they need to cooperate. They need to really get together to do these things. And that is what India, over its chairmanship over the last 1 year, from November last year when it took over from Uzbekistan till today, it has undertaken a large number of actions and it has given a large number of proposals which it would like to take forward. As far as coming together as a trade bloc, something like what you mentioned, EU, but we could also mention RCEP or what is the new format of the TPP, of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which is now known as the Comprehensive and Progressive TPP. So I don't think it will become a trade bloc of that nature. Of course, there have been some suggestions that were made quite some time ago that we have an SCO free trade area, but that has really not gone forward precisely for the reason that I mentioned earlier, that China, in terms of either its size, both territorially, population-wise, as also its economic and military and political might, it is much larger than all the other countries put together several times. So in that sense, it is a very unequal equation between all these countries. But yes, in terms of connectivity under the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, under India's Chabahar Initiative from Chabahar to go to Afghanistan and to Central Asia, under India's and Iran and Russia's initiative of International North-South Transport Corridor going from India to Iran and from there up north, and in that including also Central Asian countries. I think that these connectivity issues, proposals are important, are significant. They are making some progress. But I think on the other aspects, it will basically be have to done on a bilateral basis. But that having been said, India has proposed a number of new initiatives, like in terms of having a startup and innovation group, in terms of having a special working group on that, having a new expert working group on traditional medicine. And it has also undertaken many of these initiatives over the last few months. For instance, the first ever SCO Young Scientist Conclave that was held just a few days ago. More than 200 scientists participated in this conclave, and that is, of course, extremely important because group of SCO, which accounts for about 42-43% of the world population and about 23% of the world GDP. It has 800 million young people. So getting all young scientists together to provide innovative solutions to the challenges and problems that the world is facing, that is very important. You mentioned about the Delhi Action Plan on trade and economic cooperation that will take place. That also has been brought out by, again, the first ever consortium of SCO economic think tanks that was organized by India in August of this year. So a number of these initiatives, there was also the SCO Startup Forum, the first ever that took place on 27th October. So a number of such initiatives which will really help all these countries to come together and to collaborate more actively in terms of promoting trade and economic cooperation.
And in the coming days, we will continue our discussions on India and the SCO. This year, India and SCO have completed 15 years of formal association, and India continues its commitment of widening cooperation with the SCO by playing a proactive, positive and constructive role in the organization. With this, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on meeting of Shanghai Cooperation Organization Council of Heads of Government. The participants were Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.